I'm excited to share that my latest book, How to Pay Your Mortgage Off in 10 Years, was announced as a finalist in the Personal Finance and Investment category of the 2024 Australian Business Book Awards. With its non-preachy, or at least I hope it is, easy to follow advice and heaps of brand new frugal tips, this book is helping thousands of people ditch their debt and reduce their mortgage. It is available online and in all good bookstores.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, The Joyful Frugalista. And now here's your host, Serena Bird.
Yuma Frugalistas, and welcome. Today I have a special guest. In fact, we're recording today in person, so he's right next to me. And of course, all of my guests are special. So this guest is someone who is a business owner and who has been able to turn his passion into an award-winning business. But first, I have a favour to ask of you. If you enjoy this podcast and find it useful for you, please pay it forward by sharing with a friend. And even better, please follow the Joyful Frugalista podcast. Scott Leggo is a leading Australian landscape photographer who travels the country capturing unique images of Australia. Now, I particularly like his alpine photos. I really love Australia's alpine area and have been a skier since a young age. So I'm a little bit biased, but he has a lot of other amazing photos, including of the Great Barrier Reef and the outback. He runs a multi-award-winning business that sells his photos through his Canberra gallery and online as premium quality artworks and gifts. I also really love his jigsaw puzzles. Okay, jigsaw puzzler. He's also served as Director, Deputy Chair of the Canberra Business Chamber, and today we'll also be talking about business. Welcome, Scott, to the Joyful Frugalista podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, in preparation for this podcast, I was talking with your wife, and you have been outed as a frugalista from a very, very young age.
That may be true. In fact, it probably is true. So, she's probably put me in it there.
So what sort of things did you do to save or earn money from when you were young?
Oh, so what did I do when I was young? So I guess I probably started out doing lots of things. So, Dad was very encouraging, and as was Mum, but Dad in particular, very encouraging of me to try and think about, how I could kind of save towards goals. So I started out collecting cans. So I used to do a paper run as well. So my bike was set up with, the big box on the front, which you could have all the papers in. But it just so happened that worked out really, really well to put cans in. So I lived near a few different sports ovals and would go around at the end of football games and collect cans from there. Diehard Essendon fan as well. So back in the days when Essendon was at Windy Hill, we used to, go and collect cans at the end of the game. So it became a bit of an enterprise that started out as something small. And as a result of that, I bought my first cassette radio player from all the money that I'd bought from secondhand. So back in the day, it was $99 for this little cassette radio set, and all that was paid for with can money. So, that was my first little kind of savings goal that I had. So, yeah. Did
you listen to the radio and record it on your cassette?
I did, yeah. That was back in the days where they had the 5 o'clock funnies, I think it was, on Fox FM in Melbourne. And, I used to record some of them. And, definitely.
Those were the days. And actually, my children also collect cans for the container deposit scheme.
Yes, I've got my kids onto that.
Yeah. Do you end up doing most of the work as well?
No, we end up doing most of the work in terms of getting others to kind of contribute. So they're good at doing ones that we've got from home, but I think we're good at rounding up other people to contribute a few extra bags of cans and bottles when we go there.
We do get a few from family. But hubby tends to collect them when he's putting out the recycling, because we live in an apartment building and not everyone's so good at recycling. But he does make the kids sort them. Because you know how you can do the two, like one you just wrap up in plastic and just plastic bag and give it to them, or the one where you do it manually?
Go in the machine and do it.
Yeah, he's like, they must do it themselves.
Yes. Yeah, so look, I mean, so for me, I'm very encouraging of my kids to do it for the reason that I think, they can see the translation between something that they're doing and then receiving money for it at the end. So I think it's a really good thing for them to understand the correlation between, effort and reward, and that if they want to save towards something, they want to spend some money on something, that they've got money that they earned through an activity. And I think, it's really good to kind of instill in that direct connection between what you can save and, the effort that you put in. And, funnily enough, more effort that you put in, the more you get at the end. And also then, the ability to, kind of recruit the grandparents to kind of, bring some cans or bottles when they come and visit as well. So yeah, I think it's a good foundation around, kind of savings, but equally that kind of, reward and return for the money for how much you put in. So yeah, I think it's great for kids, definitely.
Look, I hear you. And actually, my eldest is at that age where he can get a part-time job. And so I'll be working with him soon. I mean, he's fine. Like, he'll be doing it all. But sometimes they just need that little bit of a nudge, someone else to look at their CV and help them. But, we have been reflecting that there are now less of these kind of entry-level things, like the paper runs are pretty much gone, for instance.
Yeah. So I think, you just have to kind of look at what is available for kids. And I mean, there's got friends of mine who have got some pretty entrepreneurial kids. One comes to mind where, he's got a 3D printer and he's making things for other kids at school. And now he's getting orders from kids at other schools to make these things from a 3D printer. So I think, some of the opportunities, that we used to have, when I was growing up may not exist. But I think, as the economy shifts and evolves, there's just new and different opportunities. So I think, some of those things are probably great for kids too, because it's setting them up for the type of economy that they're going to, work in the future versus maybe the ones that, we kind of work in. So I think it does constantly shift, but I think there's always opportunities, to let kids kind of be kids and have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit for those that want to do so. Yeah.
Exactly. I fully agree with helping kids understand the entrepreneurial opportunities and not necessarily putting their career or their life in a box.
Absolutely. And if it's something that they enjoy doing, so this kid the other day, was quite proud of showing me what he was able to produce from the 3D printer. I clearly then learning about the files and how it all kind of works, and then having to then understand, cost of goods in terms of, the plastic that was being melted to produce these things, what he has to do to then actually make a profit out of it. How does he value his time? So, they're all kind of useful skills, I think, for people to understand how all that kind of works in terms of, how do you put a value on some of that, making sure that you're actually doing something that's actually making a profit or at least breaking even. And then, is it worth a reward for what you're sacrificing in terms of time and effort you're doing that? In his case, with a 3D printer, once he's kind of set it goes for a few hours and there's not too much involvement. But, then how does he scale that? How does he actually kind of make it worthwhile? Then how does he market that? So how does he get other kids to know what, he's offering as a little product in terms of what he's making from some of these things? So, yeah, so I think all of those things are great for kids. And, if they can use the technology and opportunities that exist in the current economy versus having to do it the way we did is fantastic. That
sounds like a business owner speaking.
Yeah, probably a little bit. I mean, I definitely think about things differently, owning a business now than probably what I did. Some of those things I was just talking about where you do start to view things, I think, through a different lens around, valuing time. How do you kind of market something? How do you get the product out there? Is it something that a customer actually wants to buy? Are they willing to give you money in exchange for that kind of, exchange mutual? I talk about it as a mutual exchange of value. Someone's willing to give you money in return for you giving them something that they value in return. So, yeah, I definitely probably think about some of these things a little bit differently now that I own a business compared to maybe what I did before. I think I've always had that idea of, kind of saving and, being kind of conscious of money and things like that. But I think, once you start to own a business, you start to consider lots of other different aspects around it than maybe you probably didn't, prior.
Especially something like photography. For a lot of people, it's like a black hole of how much expensive equipment can you buy? How many lenses? You're nodding here because there's a lot of shiny stuff you can spend your money on.
It is. And I think, in my business, obviously, there's a whole lot of shiny things that you can spend money on, but then you have to look at across the total of the expenditure in terms of what it is and where you need to spend money in order to grow the business. So you could throw a whole lot of money at having the best camera gear in the world, but if you haven't spent any money on marketing, you haven't spent any time developing the team, you haven't spent any money on actually then how you kind of present your product, your goods or what have you. So it's really around, that kind of spread and what are the business needs at the time. Obviously, you can't start a photography business without a camera in that sense, but, you very quickly realize that actually that the equipment or the tools to do that is actually a very, very small component of what you actually need to be focusing on spending money investing in as a business. They're tools to enable you to do that, but kind of once you've got those enablers in place, now you've got to focus on all the other aspects of business. So yeah, you definitely learn that fairly quickly, I think, from a business point of view. Yeah.
So you weren't always in business. So I know, sneak peek, because I've researched you, yes, and I know a little bit about your background, but my listeners don't. So you were not always.
No, so I'm very unconventional in that sense. So I think, a lot of people think, they hear the word, photographer, they think, arty, creative type. They think I'm going to turn up in ripped jeans and, a singlet or something like that. I'm probably the complete antithesis of that in one sense. So, I was in the Air Force for 10 years, then I was in the public service. Then I was a management consultant. So, very kind of probably straight down the line, quite procedural based, very kind of directive type roles that I've had, which is probably the opposite of, kind of arty, creative, kind of field of endeavor. That said, though, I think what that has done is given me a really, really good foundation about structures, systems, processes that I've then been able to take across to the business. And as a result, I think, we're at an advantage as a business because I've kind of got that background in understanding what needs to kind of sit behind it. And I think, a lot of photographers struggle where they might be really, really good at the art side of the house, but they really struggle with the business aspects. And I think probably what I've been able to do, I think because of my background, is bring some of those systems, processes, those frameworks, those structures to how we actually run the business. And I think that's been of great benefit, to us as a result. So yeah, very, very different to probably the traditional kind of route where, someone goes to an art school or goes and studies photography and then kind of jumps straight into it. I've come into it much later in life with very different kind of background. So I think that has actually been a positive for me. And it's probably also encouraging for people that are listening to realize that, you don't have to choose your vocation or your career, quite early on. You can do something that is quite different and evolve that. I definitely haven't followed a linear path in terms of what I've done career-wise. And I think that should be some encouragement to people to realize that you don't have to have everything kind of worked out when you're 18, know exactly what degree you're going to do, and it's going to set you up till you kind of retire. You can do a range of different things as you go along.
Wow. Yeah, it does sound like you've had a really, really interesting career and done a lot of things. Was it scary to leave the stability of things you've known to be a business owner, particularly in a creative space?
To be honest, I don't know if I knew at the time. So yes, it's a little bit scary, but I think it's probably scarier once you actually get into it, in the sense that I probably didn't know what I didn't know when I went out. So in the sense that I left behind, very kind of stable, guaranteed, secure career, job, earning good money. And then I was like, I'll be able to kind of work this out. I probably didn't at the time realize actually how hard it is. And so I probably wasn't as scared as maybe I should have been, probably because I was a little bit ignorant, in some senses around just what was ahead of me. I think, when you go from that regular, stable kind of, I know that I'm being paid every fortnight, income and where it's coming from isn't something that kind of factors too much into your mind. But the moment you step out and you're running your own business and you're directly responsible for your income and whether revenue is coming in or not, it suddenly starts to change things. So I would say that it wasn't that scary in making the move, but once I had made the move, it became a lot more scary when I think I probably struggled to get the revenue that I thought I would get in the time that I thought I would get. So probably became a little bit scarier once I'd actually already made the leap. So maybe it's glad that I didn't get told how hard it would be. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have made the leap. But yeah, so for me, it was an easy decision in that sense. And I don't know that I was probably as well aware of some of the challenges that were ahead of me as maybe I could have been.
I don't think anyone's ever prepared. It's like having children. It's going to be a lot of work, but until you do it,
don't actually know what you're in for. And so I think, my advice around that, though, would be that, and this is something that I didn't do early on, and I definitely do a lot now, is that I think early on what I should have done is probably sought out advice from those that had, done something similar in terms of a transition like that, going from that secure, stable to going and running your own business. There's lots of people out there in the community, business community, largely, that are happy to help and provide advice. And I think I probably could have done a better job at seeking out some of that. And as a result, I probably could have shortened the time frame in which I learned some of those lessons. Rather than having to learn them, I might have been able to have kind of skipped some of that pain around some of those lessons. But that said, I have gone through that process. I have learnt them. But, the learning for me out of that I would pass on to other people would be to seek out other business owners, seek out other people that might be able to do it or have done it and have actually been successful at it. Because I think a lot of people have potentially run a business, but you may not necessarily want their advice either. So, look for those that have actually been successful and been able to do well at it.
Can seem a bit daunting sometimes to talk to someone like that, but I've found that people are often really generous with their time, particularly in a supportive ecosystem like Canberra. They're often really happy to help other businesses.
Yeah, look, I generally take the view, and I know a lot of people is, like a rising tide lifts all boats, in the sense that if you've got an ecosystem or a business community where everyone's doing well, then everyone does well. you as a business owner don't want to see other businesses, struggling or not doing very well, because as a whole, that kind of drags everyone down. So I think and believe that certainly in Canberra and elsewhere that, most business owners want to see other businesses succeed and do well, because that actually is benefit to them. So I think you'd be hard pressed to find too many people that don't recognize that, other businesses doing well is beneficial to them.
Yeah, I agree. And if they do have a competitive attitude, you probably don't want to do it collaboratively with them anyway.
Yeah.
So doing some research for this podcast, I stumbled across a TEDx video of you, and I think it was 2012.
Probably, yeah. It was a while. It feels like a while ago now.
And I know we're talking about that before, that I think you'd almost forgotten that you'd spoken about this, but you were ahead of your time because you were talking about ethical investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So look, the premise of the TEDx, talk at the time was really around concept that, we are quite disconnected from the natural world. And so, being a landscape photographer, getting out, traveling, experiencing nature, spending a lot of time outdoors, you start to realize how much time people are spending inside and aren't kind of connected to what I would, describe as the more natural world. And as a result, we're quite disconnected from where, our goods, our products and that we use are coming from. We don't understand the kind of supply chain that has happened and often the negative impacts that can have on the natural world. And then, so therefore, when that comes to kind of investing as well, is that I don't think that a lot of people probably either take the time or appreciate to understand a company or a business or where they're potentially investing, what that business may actually be investing in themselves and what are the negative consequences of some of what they may be involved in. So part of my kind of TED talk was talking about, do people actually understand where some of their super money is being invested and how that's being used by the companies that are being invested in, and just really trying to probably make people more aware and more considerate of, from an ethical investing point of view, like where are those businesses actually investing? If you're giving it to a fund or a super fund, where are they actually investing in it? And is that in line with your own beliefs? But also, do you actually appreciate where all those kind of downstream or upstream investments are leading and what are the consequences of that? And so my view is that if we're more connected with the natural world, we'd probably become more appreciative of some of those impacts. And so it's really about kind of taking the time to sit back and kind of question, where did something come from and what was involved in that? And do I really need to then, be either investing in that or buying that particular product?
Yeah, and I hear you. I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of environmentalists are keen bushwalkers or do spend a lot of time out at the outdoors, because it does reshape your thinking, doesn't it?
I think what it does is just so my perspective is what it does is it makes you realize just how interconnected everything is. And so, we buy a phone, we buy a new product. We don't really give a lot of consideration to, where the materials that go into that device or that particular product come from. The more time you spend, or even electricity, it sounds great that we're, doing Snowy Hydro 2.0 as an example, but you go down to Kosciuszko and you just see the absolutely massive scale of destructions occurring in a national park down there to kind of support that. And I think a lot of people just don't realize those kind of consequences of what sounds like it's quite green and environmentally friendly, but actually when you spend time outdoors and in amongst nature, you start to understand that it's not as black and white as what it is often made out to be. And I'm not saying, we have choices and, sometimes it's just about trying to choose the lesser of two evils, but I don't think people often appreciate, what that actually looks like on the ground when we're all sitting in our nice confines of an urbanised kind of Canberra or elsewhere, kind of environment.
Well, we are lucky in Canberra that we do have a lot of amazing...
We are. It's a great place to live and we're very, very close, and it's not called the bush capital for no reason, and I love it for that. Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, I totally hear you. When I lived in Taiwan, there was this movie called Taiwan Beauty from Above, and it was a landscape photographer who did a lot of work from helicopters, which I think you do as well. And his sort of first clips were all really lovely, looking at, heart-shaped kind of fishing things and so forth. But then he did this movie all about the problems, and he started off with all the beauty, like, the beauty of Taiwan's mountains. But then he went, these roads are causing these problems, they're causing the mudslides. People are now farming up in the mountains because they want to be able to grow cabbages because, it's the latest trendy thing to have cabbages from these areas. This is causing these problems. And when he saw it from that angle, it was actually really quite shocking.
Yeah. And again, it just comes back to probably, that premise of my TED talk, which is, do you, the more connected you can be, you understand the nature of those problems, what those kind of upstream impacts are. And I think, it's very easy for us to be disconnected from what is going on up further in the supply chain. And I think I used, in my TED talk, I used an example of a plastic spoon. We just use a plastic spoon. And I think, the intro was something along the lines of, when you use a plastic spoon, you think about the effort that was required to package it, to transport it, to, extract oil out of the ground, refine that oil, process it, ultimately turn it into a plastic spoon. And that's somehow considered more convenient than just simply washing a spoon that we already have. And how did we kind of get to that point? And then we got to that point because we're choosing kind of convenience. Oh, I've just got a spoon, chuck it away. But we're not considering all the upstream aspects that went into that plastic spoon. So the more we can do that, I think, you don't have to be an environmentalist to just be more considerate of, the total kind of supply chain impacts of everything that we do. And that's across everything that we consume.
Yeah, most definitely. So I have a final question for you. It's a question I ask all my guests. Do you have a frugalista tip to share?
Oh, a frugalista tip. I've probably got a few. Look, I think, the thing that I would say is probably a couple of aspects. One is small things matter. And what I mean by that is when you make small little investments, they add up over time. And it's the little small things that often you may not necessarily feel the direct impact of, but can have a longer term consequence. So a good example that I kind of talk about in terms of what Dad kind of taught me and what I've been able to do through my life is, remember when Dad got a small pay rise for something, and rather than spending that money, he was like, hey, we're kind of okay. We've learned to live within our means, what we've got. He essentially parked that money and then put it aside, and each fortnight that was going to, to savings. Now, he never missed that money because he never had that money in the first place. But that small amount of money, cumulatively over time added up to quite a bit of savings. And he never ever knew what he was missing out on because he never actually got it. I've probably taken a similar view, over my life around all those small things can add up. When I was in the public service, when I was in the military and things like that, I'd go away, and travel and things like that. You'd get a travel allowance, you get meal allowances and things like that. I would just take that straight and put it off the mortgage. And, you never kind of missed that because you never had it in the first place. But as a result, all those lots of small little contributions start to pay down that mortgage because you're putting in extra things against your mortgage or whatever your savings goal may be that wouldn't have otherwise gone there. If you just gone and spent that money, you probably don't really, in 2 or 3 years' time, kind of really notice the difference, but you will notice the difference if you've been able to pay down your mortgage or make some savings kind of quicker. And that the related point I would make about, as a frugalista tip is when you're considering that is, I think I mentioned I used to love those Australian industry super ads where someone's going up the escalator and someone's going down, where, you're both investing the same amount of money, but, the compound difference that just a small percentage rate, difference in returns can make. And so I think a lot of people discount or don't pay enough attention to the power of compounding interest, that even those small little contributions that over a period of 20, 30, 40 years can make a really, really big difference. You and me sacrificing $5 or $10, cutting a coffee daily or something like that. If you can then put that money aside over a long period of time, even with, quite an insignificant interest rate, will compound and actually you'll end up with quite a substantial amount of money off a very, very small contribution. And so I think, understanding the power of those small contributions and just realizing that you can make some of those small contributions can really set yourself up for long-term success when it comes to investing or saving. If I can jump in with one more tip, I would, one other that I always talk about is, the poor people pay twice. And what I mean by that is that you can become poor by having to buy things multiple times. So if instead of buying something that lasts, you buy the kind of cheaper alternative, but in 6 or 12 months' time, you've essentially got to go back and rebuy that thing because it didn't last or wasn't. You're better off actually, maybe having to spend a little bit more initially on something that you need, but knowing that that'll last a lifetime, you've incurred that cost and you're never going to have to incur that cost again, versus a more kind of consumerist approach, which is, I buy something, it breaks, I buy another one, it breaks. You think about some of those things that, you're just constantly rinsing and repeating. Yeah, it might be, your new Teflon frying pan, but they don't last for many years. So think about how many, in the last 20 years, how many Teflon frying pans may have you gone through? Whereas if you just bought one frying pan that, was maybe stainless steel that lasted that whole 20 years, imagine how much you would save. So that kind of mindset and that mentality around thinking that I can buy something that will last means you just incur that cost once or, maybe twice in your lifetime versus multiple times. And so again, that's the power of kind of those cumulative expenses and removing some of them. And that as a result means you've then got more money from a savings perspective. So
And there's the energy efficiency aspect to this too, like particularly a lot of heating and cooling things that if they're cheap, they may not necessarily be that effective. So you do end up paying more for them in terms of your energy costs as well.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, the more that you can, buy less stuff is definitely something I can talk about. Yeah, the more you can, buy less stuff and make it last, you're at a financial advantage. And then, from a sustainability perspective as well, you're putting the world in front as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for being my guest today. So if you are in Canberra, make sure to check out his gallery. It's in Kingston, right?
It is, Jardine Street in Kingston. Yep.
It's beautiful. And you can also find him online. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
What if
The Joyful Frugalista does not provide financial advice. Any opinions or information shared are my views or those of my guests. Please consider seeking independent legal, financial, taxation or other advice regarding your unique circumstances.
Oh, I long to be with you, walking toward the sea, and the time